Now, breaking news from WSFA 12 News.
Welcome to this WSFA 12 News special report celebrating Selma. Breaking news coverage today of a historic event in Alabama, the commemoration marking a moment that changed our state and the entire country. This weekend, as you can see live, thousands of people are in Selma to mark the 50th anniversary of Bloody Sunday. That's the day civil rights marchers marching for voting rights were beaten and gassed as they crossed Selma's Edmund Pettus Bridge, which you see in the background of this picture. Now, days later, a successful march finally reached the state capitol in Montgomery, and it was just a short time after that that Congress passed the 1965 Voting Rights Act, ensuring equal voting rights for all. As you can see from that live picture, thousands of people on Broad Street right there in front of the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and that is where a stage is set up. That is where we will hear from President Barack Obama later today. He will speak along with other dignitaries, including Congressman John Lewis, who was there on Bloody Sunday. Governor Robert Bentley also invited to Selma today, and you can count on WSFA 12 News for live Team 12 coverage. Reporter Melissa Johnson continues our team coverage now from Selma, and she's with Governor Robert Bentley, who is also marking this historic occasion. Melissa?
Well, good morning, Mark. We're just about a block away or so from the base of the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Governor Robert Bentley has had a very busy morning here, speaking with media really all over the country, all over the world. But I've heard you say several times that you are honored to host all of these guests here today.
Well, we really are. We want to welcome people from all over the country and from all over the world who are coming to this commemoration that we're having today. You know, 50 years ago, this was a very significant day, and we need to honor the men and women who were involved in that, really searching for the ability to vote.
Air Force One, we're expecting at Maxwell Air Force just in a short bit of time. Let's go back to Tanya Terry, who is there live. And Tanya, do we have an updated arrival time yet?
Yes, Mark. They're landing right now, wheels down. This is Air Force One landing right now, yes. And here they are, ladies and gentlemen. There's the president getting off Air Force One. You can hear the crowd behind me. Maybe you can over the roar of these engines. I'm not sure you can, but there he is with Sasha and Malia right behind him. Mrs. Obama behind the girls, and then, of course, that is her mother behind her.
Well, we just had an announcement of some of the people who will be sitting on that stage. There is Mayor George Evans, Governor Robert Bentley, and Congresswoman Terry Sewell. They are taking their steps right now on the stage ahead of the president's speech. So we can only imagine that the president will be coming out in just a few minutes. From where I am standing, I can see Congressman John Lewis. I am assuming he will be coming out next. Now that these three have been announced. Let's listen. And here comes the President of the United States. The First Lady and the President. Well, she went back in for a moment there. There we go. We have another president, a former president of the United States. We have President George Bush and First Lady Laura Bush. They are also heading to the stage. Behind them, President Barack Obama and First Lady Michelle Obama. You can hear the presidential music as both presidents take the stage. Also walking with them on the other side of the First Lady is Georgia Congressman George Lewis. And you can see former President George Bush waving to the crowd. You can see the President and the First Lady also waving to the crowd, and right behind them, Georgia Congressman George Lewis. They are all on the stage. It has been a very, very long day. This trip was delayed for about 50 minutes, so everyone I'm sure here is so happy to see that they are here and the program is about to begin.
Alabama is a different state today than it was in 1965, and so is our nation. We've come a long way since the events of that Bloody Sunday. Selma changed America. Selma changed the world.
I present to you the civil rights icon, John Lewis.
On March 7, 1965, a few innocent children of God some carrying only a bedroll, a few clutching a simple bag, a plain purse, or a backpack, were inspired to walk 50 dangerous miles from Selma to Montgomery to demonstrate the need for voting rights in the state of Alabama. On that day, 600 people marched into history, walking 2 by 2 down the sidewalk. Our country will never, ever be the same because of what happened on this bridge. It is a great honor for me to return to my home state of Alabama, to present to you, not to introduce to you, but to present to you the President of the United States. If someone had told me when we were crossing this bridge that one day I will be back here introducing the first African-American president, I would have said, you're crazy, you're out of your mind, you don't know what you're talking about. President Barack Obama.
As John noted, there are places and moments in America where this nation's destiny has been decided. Many are sites of war: Concord and Lexington, Appomattox, Gettysburg. Others are sites that symbolize the daring of America's character: Independence Hall and Seneca Falls, Kitty Hawk and Cape Canaveral. Selma is such a place. In one afternoon 50 years ago, so much of our turbulent history, the stain of slavery and anguish of civil war, the yoke of segregation and tyranny of Jim Crow, the death of 4 little girls in Birmingham, and the dream of a Baptist preacher, all that history met on this bridge. And because of men and women like John Lewis, Joseph Lowry, Hosea Williams, Amelia Bunton, Diane Nash, Ralph Abernathy, C.T. Vivian, Andrew Young, Fred Shuttlesworth, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., so many others, the idea of a just America, and a fair America, an inclusive America, and a generous America, that idea ultimately triumphed. What could more profoundly vindicate the idea of America than plain and humble people, unsung, the downtrodden, the dreamers not of high station, not born to wealth or privilege, not of one religious tradition, but many, coming together to shape their country's course. What greater expression of faith in the American experiment than this? What greater form of patriotism is there than the belief that America is not yet finished, that we are strong enough to be self-critical, that each successive generation can look upon our imperfections and decide that it is in our power to remake this nation to more closely align with our highest ideals. That's why Selma is not some outlier in the American experience. That's why it's not a museum or a static monument to behold from a distance. It is instead the manifestation of a creed written into our founding documents. The Voting Rights Act was one of the crowning achievements of our democracy, the result of Republican and Democratic efforts. President Reagan signed its renewal when he was in office. President George W. Bush signed its renewal when he was in office. 100 members of Congress have come here today to honor people who are willing to die for the right to protect it. If we want to honor this day, let that 100 go back to Washington and gather 400 more and together pledge to make it their mission to restore that law this year. That's how we honor those on this bridge.
President Barack Obama now mingling with audience members in Selma following a very well-received speech. You could hear lots of people cheering him on at certain moments throughout his speech. The president in Selma marking the 50th anniversary of Bloody Sunday. Let's go back to our own Valerie Lawson, who is standing by at the foot of the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and that is where the president and other dignitaries are expected to take a march of their own in reenactment of sort of a, so to speak, of the marches that happened 50 years ago. Valerie?
Well, Mark, people are starting to leave. The president spoke about 10, 15 minutes ago, so the crowd is slowly but surely dispersing, but there are people who are still here hoping to get a glimpse of the president and hopefully a picture, a wave, or something, some kind of attention from the president. We are expecting him to take a march or a walk across the Edmund Pettus Bridge with his family, his two daughters, his wife, his mother-in-law. They're all here. They were front and center as the president spoke today, and they are starting to move as we speak. I can see Martin Luther King III walking along the bridge. I can see Dr. Fred Reese, also one of the members of the Courageous Eight that helped bring Dr. King to Selma many years ago, 50 years ago, to move those voting rights issues along. They are now moving slowly but surely across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, Mark.
Indeed, Valerie, it's an interesting sight with that truck and all the photographers and videographers who are getting shots of this. This is the second time, we assume it is the second time that President Obama has walked across this bridge, because he was in Selma for this very same anniversary back in 2007. And I noticed, Valerie, the march is moving rather slowly. It will likely take some time, but I'm sure that's by design, because there are some older people who are in that group.
Yes, and it's also an opportunity to just kind of soak in the history of things. You said that the president was here back in 2007, and yes, he may have walked across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, but this one has got to be just a little bit more important, because he is doing this march with his family. He is with his two daughters, his wife, his mother-in-law, and they are taking this historic march together. They will be able to tour the National Voting Rights Museum together. So although he may have visited in 2007 and he may have marched across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, this one is different because this is a family event, Mark.
Well, he's also a sitting president this time. Let's just pause for a moment and soak in what's happening, both visually and audibly, and let's hear what it would be like for us to be in Selma. Let's pause. Valerie, it looks like they've reached the crest of the bridge, and it is at that point where you can begin to see what is on the other side. So it must have been at that point where the marchers in 1965 could see the state troopers and other law enforcement officers who were waiting for them on the other side of the bridge. And it appears as though the march is pausing at the crest of the bridge right now.
It does, and this is where Congressman John Lewis talks about getting to the top of the bridge and looking down and seeing a sea of blue, state troopers at the foot of the bridge on horseback. So I'm assuming that they are pausing at the top of the bridge to just kind of reflect on that moment. I am sure John Lewis, Congressman John Lewis, is leading the march right now. So this is a time for him to explain to everyone who is involved in the march right now what it was like to cross, get to the top of the bridge, and to look down and see the state troopers. And as they got closer, the troopers telling them that they have a couple of minutes to turn around. And according to Lewis, before they could even think about turning around, they were attacked.
Again, this is the chopper, Marine One, that will be holding the President and First Lady. We should see them get off the plane any moment now and get ready to get back on board Air Force One. Making sure everything's okay. And there they are. The President. Sasha, Malia, the First Lady, and the First Lady's mother. In their final few minutes here in Alabama before they get ready to take off.
Tanya, they don't have that spring in their step like they did when they arrived. I imagine they're quite tuckered out after this long day.
Yeah, we were hoping they might spring their step and come over this way, Mark, but it doesn't look like that's going to happen. Looks like they're going to get right back on board. He did give us a little wave. That was nice of him as he gets ready to board Air Force One. The girls skipping up the stairs there, their grandmother right after them. And there we have the First Lady and President Obama as they're climbing the stairs, getting ready to end their trip here to Montgomery, Alabama, on what has been an historic visit to Selma. They're going to give us one last wave as they get ready to go. And that wraps up their trip. Mark, they're back on the plane now. I'm sure they have some things they have to go through as they get ready to take off here. Everybody is boarding on the back of the plane that came along with them, all the members of the press and the security and the staff and everybody that came along with them. And now we're ending our visit.
It had to be quite an emotional visit for the President. And we assumed that...
Absolutely. You kind of heard it in his voice, too, didn't you, Mark? When he was talking, you could kind of hear it in his voice. He knew exactly where he was. It was very fire and brimstone there for a little while. It seemed a lot like some of those Southern Baptist preachers that you hear sometimes during parts of the speech. So he was very aware of where he was and the significance of that, I think, to the people in the crowd who had waited so long to see him and hear him. And it was something to see and something to hear out there. I was surprised that we didn't hear anything from former President George W. Bush, but I'm sure those are decisions that are made way ahead of time. And as Marine One gets ready to take off in just a few minutes, we get to see Air Force One depart. Mark, it must have been something too for all of the people there in Selma who had waited all morning long, some of them there since 3 or 4 this morning. Can you imagine?
Indeed, and I think all of them, Tanya, played quite the gracious host. We didn't really hear of much civil disobedience or bad behavior at all. I think Alabama did a great job today, and I do think that speech by President Obama will go down as one of the more significant speeches of his presidency.
And it really had to be when you look at the significance of what happened 50 years ago. And he really put it out there, telling people that those people fought and died and went through all of that so they would have the right to vote, and shame on them if they're not registered to vote, so they need to do that. Also, he got very passionate when he talked about what happened on that bridge that was right behind him. So it's one thing, I'm sure, to have a speech and go over it and make sure you'll deliver it just the right way, but it's another thing to be standing there in the presence of people who were there on that bridge 50 years ago and see that bridge for yourself. We can see that they're taking one last look, making sure everything is okay. The last few people are boarding Air Force One. We expect it to be taking off here very, very shortly, Mark.
All right, and of course, WSFA 12 News will be with you until Air Force One is wheels up, as we say. That's kind of customary when a president comes to visit a town. Oftentimes, the media will cover that event from wheels down to wheels up, and we want to do that in respect of the president and in respect of our viewers who may want to see all that there is to see of this presidential visit.
And it is quite a sight to see, Mark. We've been talking to you about this not being any old ordinary plane. Air Force One is a special vehicle, 3 stories high. Again, it is accommodating for the president with anything that he would have to do as far as business. It's almost like having the Oval Office there in flight with him. There's an executive suite there, lavatory, and also a conference room where he can meet with people. He was able to talk to the press. He also sent out a copy of his speech, or it was sent out earlier, so we had a chance to read over that, and I'm sure there are parts of the speech, if not all of it, right now streaming on WSFA.com. It is something to have technology too, to see people tweeting to us and seeing what they saw and also giving them our perspective. This was a way to cover a Jubilee ceremony unlike any other that we've covered before, or a Bloody Sunday celebration. There's Air Force One taking off. Just a massive aircraft, and again, Mark, we will stay with it until it is wheels up, which should be any moment now. It is something to watch history unfold like that. Seeing him land here earlier today, right before 1 o'clock, and then to see him aboard Marine One and head on over and give, as you mentioned, Mark, what will go down in history as an impassioned speech, a call to action, really, after seeing what happened there in Selma 50 years ago, and to talk about what is happening there now and what needs to happen, not only in Selma because of the significance to Selma, but because of the significance to everyone in Alabama, across the country, and around the world. So we're waiting to see it in the air, Air Force One, and we're going to stay with it until then.
And as we said, Tanya, I don't know if you can see because you're there live, but in the television image, it is a gorgeous shot. It's rather appropriate that this would mark the end of our coverage, because there's just a gorgeous sunset coming through the lens of the camera.
Well, I'm glad you're able to see it. Sometimes it's hard to know whether that's going to translate, Mark, and you're going to be able to see what we see out here, but it is absolutely beautiful. The colors across the sky right now, and it was fitting, you know, that the first family got off of Marine One, got on Air Force One, kind of bid us adieu as the sun is setting here at Maxwell Air Force Base. Again, it made for some beautiful pictures, and we were happy to bring them to you here on WSFA 12 News from start to finish.
Indeed, Tanya. We'll watch and hopefully see Air Force One streak us across the sky, if you will, before we say goodbye.
Mark, this is something they do all the time, and when I say they, I mean the first family and of course all the people who travel along with them. But for those of us who don't get to cover this very often, if ever, this is an amazing opportunity to see the first family travel and what goes into a presidential visit. It is a huge undertaking for Maxwell, for Montgomery, for the folks in Selma, and all the places in between. And as you mentioned, there it goes, Mark. They're about to be wheels up here in just a few seconds. And we'll watch as the first family and their team takes off, headed back to Washington, D.C., and that ends the president's visit to Montgomery, Alabama, his trip to Selma. What an historic day this has been. Started out early this morning for our coverage, and we were there with you from before he arrived until after he left. A lot of the Secret Service shaking hands. Job well done. The president's in the air now. Their job's all done here. And Mark, so is ours.
Indeed. Wheels up. Tanya Terry, thank you very much. A great job to you. A great job to our entire crew in Montgomery and Selma. As we watch Air Force One fly off into the distance, we're reminded of the day. What a marathon day it was, and we enjoyed every minute of it, bringing you video highlights of all the history that was made in Montgomery and Selma today. And our coverage will continue tonight at 6 and 10 o'clock in our regular newscast. We'll bring you some of the highlights that we remembered and that we know you want to see again, so we hope you'll join us then. Right now, we want to provide you with, the last 10 minutes or so of NBC Nightly News, which is in progress right now. Then we'll see you back here at 6 o'clock. Thanks for watching.